Hello, my name is Jeremy Sims, and I enjoy teaching the Bible. Specifically, I like really diving deep into the Bible, at least as deep as I can go, and try to uncover lots of new things I've never seen before, and then share it with other people. That's really exciting to me. So, if you are a people who enjoys being excited about learning new things from the Bible, then hopefully you'll find this helpful. Especially if you never studied the Book of Jeremiah, you'll probably get a lot of stuff because most people aren't very familiar with it. If you have like a doctorate in Jeremiahism, then you probably won't get much from me. I'm not that advanced by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, yeah. So hopefully this will be fun. What we're going to be looking at today is Jeremiah chapter 4, verses. I always forget what verse I'm on. I think it's verse 19 to the end of the chapter, and verse 31. So, what we'll see in this section, a little preview, we're going to see something that's kind of unique. I can't think of another example of it in all of Scripture. There probably is one, but I can't think of it. And what I see in this passage is both Jeremiah and God kind of coming together to have grief over the state of the people of God, the state of Judah. And yeah, I can't think of any other scriptures that really do that. So that's a pretty interesting thing. So let's talk real quick before we get into it. First of all, I'll say I'm excited because I'm almost caught up with all my lessons. I wanted to do a lesson, both a short version and a long version, for every small group that I was doing with my church, and I got way behind, and I've been trying to catch up for a few weeks, like pushing real hard, and I'm almost done. I got this one and then two more videos, a short and a long one, and I'll be caught up if I can get that done by Tuesday. So anyway, so I'm excited about that, and that's a good time to point out, if you want something more short and concise, I have another video like that. I'm trying to do like a long version for people who want lots of details, and short version for people who just kind of want the quick breakdown of things. So this is the long version. I'm gonna ramble about stuff. This one actually might not be as long as usual because I just don't see quite as much stuff to say in here. But every time I say one's gonna be short, it still ends up being at least 45 minutes. So if this one's not short, then apparently I cannot speak for less than 45 minutes if I have an audience that will actually let me ramble. And since this is a YouTube video nobody watches, then you're a captive audience. Now, actually, I got a few people that watch, but not many. Maybe that'll grow one day, or maybe not. I'm happy to talk to one person, like my sister. Hello, sister. I love you. All right, so let's do a quick review of where we're at. Jeremiah is about 350 years after the time of David. I've been saying 400 years, and it's 400 years by the time Jeremiah dies, but it's 350 years when he starts, more or less. So I've been kind of off in that. Anyway, about 350 years after the time of David, and Jeremiah's been called to be a prophet and to deliver warnings to Judah that they need to repent because they are on the verge of destruction. But they don't repent. So we've got a whole bunch of that. I'm not going to go chapter by chapter what we've covered so far, but let's just kind of look at the last section. What we see in the last section is we see God getting a little bit more specific about the nature of the judgment that's coming. We see the idea of the lion coming out of the brush, which is an allusion to Babylon, which was symbolized by a lion, how it's coming to hunt Judah. We see this really interesting accusation in the middle of all this, where it's just a single verse where Jeremiah accuses God of being deceptive. He says, "Surely you have deceived this people, Judah, by telling them it's going to go well with them," which is a really weird statement because God had, he had been delivering messages through Jeremiah, warning them, hey, things are not going well for you. So we discussed different possible ideas of what Jeremiah had in mind there, with my best guess being that perhaps he was suggesting that he had kind of let the people be given up to reprobate minds where they couldn't see the doom that was coming to them because they just didn't want to see. That's my best guess as to what was intended there, but really interesting thing. We get the whole idea of, in that last section, of God bringing a hot wind to the people of Judah, metaphorically speaking, where it's going to be something that you can't use, it's useless, it's going to keep you from getting your work done, it's going to kill you. We get these kind of metaphors. And we get some pictures of the forces of Babylon. It doesn't name them, but it does outline some specifics like their horses and their chariots, and that they'll do siege warfare against Jerusalem, all of which, of course, comes to pass. So, yeah, just kind of get a little bit more specific, and we see even in that passage a little bit, it kind of ends on note of the grief of God, because he says this is a bitter thing that's happening to you, and I don't see that as a happy, accusational thing, but like a, ugh. sad thing. And I also find it really interesting, Jeremiah's outburst was kind of one of the main things that leapt out at me there. And I just think we see the sincerity of Jeremiah's heart there, that he's he's a person who almost can't contain his emotions. He feels things very deeply, or at least that's my take on him. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into this section and see what we can see. Let's read through the entire thing, then we'll go back up the top and start breaking it down little by little. So Jeremiah 4, verse 19. My anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart! My heart is beating wildly. I cannot keep silent, for I hear the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Crash follows hard on crash. The whole land is laid waste. Suddenly my tents are laid waste, my curtains in a moment. How long must I see the standard, and hear the sound of the trumpet? For my people are foolish. They know me not. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are wise in doing evil, but how to do good they know not. I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and behold, there was no man, and all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins, before the Lord, before his fierce anger. For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not make a full end. For this the earth shall mourn, and the heavens shall be dark. For I have spoken, I have purposed, I have not relented, nor will I turn back. At the noise of horseman and archer, every city takes to flight. They enter thickets, they climb among rocks. All the cities are forsaken, and no man dwells in them. And you, O desolate one, what do you mean that you dress in scarlet, that you adorn yourself with ornaments of gold, that you enlarge your eyes with paint? In vain you beautify yourself. Your lovers despise you. They seek your life. For I heard a cry as of a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child. The city of the daughter of Zion, gasping for breath, stretching out her hands. Woe is me, I am fainting before murderers. A very passionate section of Scripture. Also, did you catch it in there? There is a tie between here and the story of creation. Or not the story, but, the creation. Yeah, did you catch that? That's really interesting. We'll come back to that. That's something else I wish I'd teased at the beginning, because really interesting stuff. So, verse 19. Let's read this section again. We'll break it out verse by verse. My anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart is beating wildly. I cannot keep silent, for I hear the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Crash follows hard on crash. The whole land is laid waste. Suddenly my tents are laid waste, my curtains in a moment. How long must I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? All right, so we start off with, my anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart. What's going on there? So my anguish is actually more literally translated as my bowels, or even more literally as like my soft parts. But you see, I think the KJV does my bowels, and soft parts is, I think, most literally, but it can refer to the bowels because obviously they're soft and squishy. And the idea there is just that the old mind of the olden days, they kind of thought that the seat of the emotions was in the belly. Which, interestingly enough, they have found that the health of your gut can actually affect what's going on in your head quite a bit, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that's really relevant, but it's kind of interesting. But the same way we might talk about our hearts or our minds being overwhelmed, they were like picturing it in their belly. My bowels, my anguish. The ESV, which is what I'm using here, kind of makes it a little bit more simple for us. But yeah, it's almost like he's saying, I'm so upset, I have a stomach ache, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart is beating wildly. Such vivid imagery, so powerful here. I cannot keep silent. So that's interesting. I cannot keep silent. There's a very famous, at least my pastor that I grew up with, always used to reference this passage in Jeremiah. I think probably a bunch of other preachers do too. But there's a very prominent place where Jeremiah talks about not being able to keep silent. So I thought we'd go over there and explore that. And this comes back to this idea of Jeremiah just seeming to be somebody who kind of, I don't know if you'd say wore his heart on his sleeve, but he certainly expressed his emotions very much. So maybe that's a fair thing to say. So yeah, in Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 8 and 9, he seems to be having another kind of emotional breakdown. Poor Jeremiah, I feel sorry for him. I look forward to meeting him one day. For whenever I speak, I cry out. I shout violence and destruction. This is him getting upset that he's been given this task of predicting doom all the time, of being this hated figure of prophet of doom. For the word of the Lord has come for me, a reproach and derision. For the word of the Lord has become for me a reproach and derision all day long. If I say, I will not mention him, or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. So yeah, again, just this, Jeremiah seems to be so driven by his heart, so unable to control his, the passion of his feelings, not necessarily in a bad way, just a very emotional guy. I cannot keep silent, he says here. Why? For I hear the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Trumpet was used to, in times of war, back in the ancient days, is how you communicate, because of course it's really hard to communicate over long distances. They don't have radios. What do they have? Trumpets, which can make different sounds, which can signify different things to do in the battle. Also probably pretty intimidating, I would imagine, if you have a bunch of trumpets going. But anyway, yeah, he's saying, I'm hearing these, and they're upsetting me, and I've got to talk about it. And I think he's metaphorically, of course, saying, he knows this doom of this war, this destruction is coming. Let's see, anything else mentioned in this section? Oh, English balance. I think I put something in here that was incorrect. No, I think that's correct. Yeah, that's probably correct. Oh. Moving on to verse 20. Crash follows hard on crash. The whole land is laid waste. Suddenly my tents are laid waste, my curtains in a moment. So I thought this was really weird that it says, well, we'll get to the really weird part first, or in a second. Crash follows hard on crash. This is probably a dumb translation. I don't know why ESV went this way. No other translation translates this as crash upon crashing. Crash upon crash. It most literally means like a fracture would be the most literal meaning of that Hebrew word, but most translate it as destruction or disaster, which seems to go much better with the text. So I don't know why they went with crash on crash. It doesn't even make sense to me, because it's not like they had armaments at the time. So, what would be this crash upon crash? But destruction upon destruction makes a lot of sense. Anyway, kind of an odd choice from the ESV there. Crash follows hard on crash. The whole land is laid waste. Suddenly my tents are laid waste. My curtains in a moment. This is the part that I find weird. Why are we making a big deal about tents? Just why are we going to tents? I mean, clearly it's talking about the tents being destroyed, but why? I mean, is that any big thing? Why talk about tents? Surely people aren't living in tents at the time. They've been in, the land for a long, long time. So I looked this up and I found several different takes, and I'm not sure which ones is correct. So some people are suggesting that tents were actually still the living standard at the time, even though they've been there for a while. A lot of people are still using tents. I don't know if that's correct or not. I know very little about, I know nothing really about ancient Judah architecture. So I cannot tell you, but that's what some people say. I think this is all from commentators who supposedly should have spent some time looking into this more than me. So some people are also saying that the idea of tents may be like a carryover from older times, like maybe they had actually built actual cities now of more substance than tents. I'm sure they had some of those, by the way. There's no doubt of that, but how common tents were is the question. But maybe it's kind of allusion to cities in general, where, it used to be like, hey, these are tents, and now you have actual homes, but it's kind of like, you still kind of call them your tents. Heard some people suggesting that. Just kind of being like an older name, like we still say dialing your telephone, even though nobody actually dials their telephone anymore. Doubt, most people can tell you what a dial is these days. At least not people my age or younger. So what else? Some other suggestions I heard say that it might be talking about it might be suggesting it won't just be the cities, which might have been the more traditional structures, but also like the rural areas are also going to be destroyed. So it might be kind of suggesting that, that nobody's safe here, nobody's escaping, which that one makes some sense to me. Some people also suggested it could be referring to soldiers' tents, because, if you're setting out to war, if they were going to offer any sort of resistance, then you wouldn't be taking hard structures, you'd be taking something more temporary. Which that makes sense, except that I don't know that Judah actually was putting up any sort of a fight. It sure seems like they just retreated from what little I know, but I have not looked at that whole story for a while, the invasion of Judah. So I might be incorrect about that. The version that made the most sense to me is it might just be talking about it being using a tent because it's so frail. So it's the idea of it's being destroyed by this invading force, but it's like nothing. Anybody could tear down a tent. I could tear down a tent, and I am not a strong man at all. So if it's super easy to trample. Trample down a tent, remove the curtains, tear them up. And maybe they're suggesting that is how much resistance, how hard it's going to be for Babylon to take over the entire land. That's kind of my best guess at that, but who knows? All right, anything else to say about this verse? I don't think so. Yeah, moving on. I did not arrange my screens like I should have. How long must I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? So standard is referring to a flag, the flag of the enemy, no doubt, and the trumpets of the enemy. So it's like we're at a time of war, we're in an invasion, and how long do I have to put up with this? All right, next verse. So this whole thing has been, by the way, Jeremiah speaking. I said earlier that this is like a Jeremiah and God kind of grieving, it seems to me. But it's actually trades off from Jeremiah to God to Jeremiah to God to Jeremiah. So this has been Jeremiah's section. He's, on the ground level, like, oh, I'm so upset about this, and stressed and frustrated and terrified probably too. And then we switch over to God. For my people are foolish. They know me not. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are wise in doing evil. But how to do good they know not. The tradition I grew up in, the Independent Fundamental Baptist, they were big into having life verses, and I thought this would be a really funny one if you had kids to make your life verse. For my people are foolish. They know me not. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are wise in doing evil, but how to do good they know not. That's great, right? Here's my life verse, son. Here's a dig at you. Ha ha, you're stupid. So what we talk about that word stupid. So they are stupid children. They have no understanding. For some reason I thought, is stupid really the best translation of that? And it's probably a fine translation, but there's some nuance in that that's probably worth discussing. The probably most literal translation would just be silly. They're silly children. Also, the Strong's uses sottish as a possible definition. I had no idea what sottish means. Sottish is stupefied with, or as if with drunken. So you get this idea of like silly or kind of almost drunken acting. It's in the ballpark of stupid, and I'm sure the ESV people know more than me in terms of the translators, but I think it gives a little bit of a different tone. Kind of like the idea of they're not just stupid, because stupid to a certain extent you can't necessarily control for if you just have, low IQ. But this is like, my children are just immature, which kind of burns even more. Like they could be better, they should be better, they're just not. Almost feels like what's being said there. Oh my goodness, already 17 minutes in. I am incapable of going quickly. So this idea of they are wise in doing evil, but how to do good they know not. This seems very similar to something Paul says later. I forget exactly what it is. I think it's Paul. He says something to the fact of, to the ways of evil I would have you be ignorant, and yet I feel like, at least in times of my life, I have spent much more effort and energy in trying to figure out how to be evil than I have in how to be good, And I think perhaps the reason for that is that that we spend a lot of time, or we have an assumption that we're better than we are, I think. If there's something you need to work on spiritually, improve in, at least I find in myself, I don't want to spend a lot, I might make a resolve to do it, but I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time figuring out, like, how do I do that? How do I maximize my ability to do that? I think it's because we think too highly of our own nature, at least for me. I might be just talking to myself here, but I think we tend to think, oh, I'll just figure that out. But no, maybe it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. Maybe we should spend some more time learning how to be wise in doing good. But a really sad thing to see that they spend so much time learning how to be evil, being wise in that way. I think there was something else I want to say about this. Oh, yeah. Well, one thing that is interesting is he's saying my people are foolish, but he is still saying my people, which is nice, sort of. It's nice to remember even when God looks down at you and says, you fool. At least you're still his fool, My stupid children. I'm sure God, I don't know if God does say that about his people, but even if he does. At least we belong to him, right? So that was God's remark. We're switching back to Jeremiah here. Verse 23 through 26. I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and behold, there was no man, and all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins, before the Lord, before his fierce anger. I love. You gotta read this in stanza form. It's way better in stanza form, in my opinion. I think the traditional verses just ruin the flow. So, so this is the allusion to Genesis 1. Isn't that interesting? I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void. Without form and void is used only 2 times in the Bible. Obviously, in Genesis 1:2, it says in the beginning, let's see if we can do it from memory, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. It's Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So without form and void, these are only used 2 times in the Bible, there and here. So I don't think there's any chance that this phrase is just coincidentally thrown in. Jeremiah is drawing upon this for some reason. So let's go ahead and talk about those words, without form and void, just because, I don't know, when's the last time you looked at them? So without form probably most literally means to lie waste, a desolation, desert, figuratively, a worthless thing, in vain, confusion, empty space, without form, nothing. So there's a lot of different translations for it. Void means vacuity, or a vacuum, an undistinguishable ruin, emptiness, void. So yeah, it's interesting. So if you apply this to the judgment that's coming to Judah, you can see it fitting pretty neatly there. Everything's being ruined. It's being laid waste to, right? It is interesting that this is the words used to describe Genesis 1:2. Some people believe that Genesis 1:1, where it says God created the heavens and the earth, is an earlier creation event, and then when it says the earth was void and without form, it is saying that it was wasted, which, the explanation I've heard of this, my father favors this view, is that there's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and in that gap something happened to destroy the world, so that Genesis 1:2 is actually kind of a recreation. I don't know if that's true. I have not looked at Genesis 1 and kind of gone through it and checked out all the different perspectives. It's certainly not the most traditional understanding of that passage. I don't know if it's right. But it is interesting that it uses that word of, without form, which does mean to lie waste. It can also mean nothing, but it's not the most literal meaning of it. So kind of interesting. Something I have to look into at some point, but boy, there are a lot of strong feelings on Genesis 1. I'm a little nervous to get back there, and also it's going to take a lot of time. So I guess I'll look at it that someday. So yeah, you can see how this applies to Judah's situation and to Genesis 1, but it doesn't stop there. I don't think that's all that's going on here. I think this entire section is based on Genesis 1. I looked on earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. So again, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we have not just the earth, but then the very next thing it looks at is the heavens. All right, so this is very clearly echo. What's the first thing that God created? After that, He made the light, right? He said, "Let there be light," and that's the next thing said. And they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. So you think about that, and mountains aren't really referenced in the creation event. Well, you say that. But actually, if you think about, he separated the land and the waters, right? Well, how do we do that? We know how water works. It goes to the lowest point. So what is God actually doing there? Well, he's raising up part of the ground and lowering another part of the ground. So he is making mountains in a certain sense. So it's saying the mountains were quaking and the hills moved to and fro. So even those are being upset. And, if the mountains, which are really big and solid, are moving, then that means everything's kind of unsafe. Like everything you thought you were moored to is now becoming undone. I looked, and behold, there was no man, and all the birds of the air had fled. Of course, we see in the creation story the creation of man and birds. So it seems to me this still ties in pretty well. I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a desert. And fruitful land, I mean, come on, obviously, right? They were put in the Garden of Eden. is the first thing, the first specific location we get. So it doesn't seem to me like there's any chance of this. So what is all this about? Well, it seems to me that this is God basically saying, oh no, I dropped my phone. So what is all this about? Well, it seems to me God's saying he's kind of talking about it, essentially a decreation event. He's saying all this good stuff that I gave you, all these blessings I did, everything I've made for you, and alluding to the way he made everything, he said all that is being taken away. It's like the decreating of Judah. And, obviously it's metaphorical. Obviously it's not being taken away in the same sense that it was made in Genesis 1, but it's to paint a picture. And we see in this final verse, and all its cities, it goes, I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. So here at the end we get to cities, and that kind of breaks the pattern, right? Because there isn't anything in those first two chapters in the creation story about cities. Nothing there about that. So I thought, okay, well, that kind of breaks the pattern. But I think maybe what's happening here is he's being very poetic and making these allusions, but then like at the end he's like, yeah, your cities are going to be in ruins. So he's like kind of going from this big metaphorical layer to like, hey, let's bring this home. This is what I'm talking about. You're in trouble. So yeah, I think maybe that's why it switches there at the end. Before the Lord in his fierce anger, that's self-explanatory. There's some other stuff, I kind of want to lay out the basic idea of what I think's happening there, but there's some other stuff that's kind of worth exploring there. I looked on the mountains, behold, they were quaking, all the hills moved to and fro. So I was thinking about that, and I'm like, isn't there something about the mountains disappearing and shaking in Revelation as well? And it took me a minute to find it, but yeah, there does seems to be something about that as well. Revelation 16, verse 17. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been since man was on the earth. So great was that earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered Babylon the Great, to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people. And they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. So I would not presume to suggest I know what anything in Revelation means. Because I have not looked at it carefully, and prophecy is confusing. So I don't know what this means. I've heard some people say that part of the judgment is the world becoming literally completely flat again. And we do see that the mountains fall in this. I don't know if that's centered around Jerusalem or what. I'm not even going to speculate on it. But I thought that was interesting. I don't know if it ties in. I guess if it did, it might be kind of an interesting bookend thing, because we kind of get these echoes of things throughout the Bible. So you could say like this earthquake might be like a foreshadowing of the one to come. I would not hang anything, any real weight on that, but kind of an interesting idea. What else? This passage talks about, I didn't even see man or bird. I don't think there's any reason to believe that every man and bird actually left this area. This is exaggeration of drawing upon that Genesis 1 narrative, I think. And I guess I say this every lesson, but Jeremiah just paints these like metaphorical word pictures, and you kind of have to decipher each one and then figure out what he means and kind of put them together to get his overall purpose. But yeah, it's poetic, so just keep that in mind. So yeah, we kind of see the decreating here, and I think that's pretty interesting. We see sky, earth, plant, and beast all depart. And then here at the end, Jeremiah just kind of brings it back to earth and is like, enough metaphors. This is what I'm saying. I'm saying you guys are in trouble. All right, moving on. So that was Jeremiah talking. Again, from this, you get kind of like this, almost like this ground up view from Jeremiah, and then this above down view from God, with these two alternating perspectives. For thus says the Lord in verse 27, The whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not make a full end. For this the earth shall mourn, and the heavens above be dark. For I have spoken, I have purposed, I have not relented, nor will I turn back. I don't think I actually have much to say about this section. You're going to see it sounds like God saying, I'm done with you, judgment's coming no matter what. But I don't think that's actually the case. I think what is being said here is, because we see in the next section, he's again saying, repent. Jeremiah goes back to, like, you guys need to repent. I think what we're saying is by the time we get to this point where all this stuff's happening, that's when you can't repent anymore. By the time the ruin is upon you, it's too late. For thus the Lord, the whole land shall be a desolation, yet it will not make a full end. So this is actually something we see over and over again, of there always being sort of a remnant, especially in this case, of the people of God. And what I didn't know exactly, I kind of had some vague ideas of this, but I looked it up. This is actually specified in the Old Testament law that when Judah got in this place where they defied God, he would make sure to leave a remnant. And so I have a couple passages that kind of echo this idea that I thought were worth mentioning. Leviticus 26, of course, from the Mosaic Law, the covenant. But if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers and their treachery that they committed against me, and also in walking contrary to me, this is the stipulations God's making for when the people turn away from him and come under condemnation, so that I walked contrary to them and brought them into the land of their enemies. If then their uncircumcised heart is humbled, and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and I will remember my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. But the land shall be abandoned by them, and enjoy its Sabbaths, while it lies desolate without them. And they shall make amends for their iniquity, because they spurned my rules, and their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not spurn them, neither will I abhor them, so that as to destroy them utterly and break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God. But I will for their sake remember the covenant with their forefathers, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. So yeah, we see this whole idea of sparing them, of keeping his end of the covenant even when they're not, is set up way back when, way before it ever happened. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, real interesting. I also have another section from Jeremiah. This is Jeremiah 46, and I just thought this was an interesting way of framing it. It's kind of discussing a similar idea, but I like the way Jeremiah put it here, so I thought I'd share this. But fear not, O Jacob my servant, nor be dismayed, O Israel, for behold, this is God speaking through Jeremiah, I will save you from far away, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return and have quiet and ease, and none shall make him afraid. Fear not, O Jacob my servant, declares the Lord, for I am with you. I will make a full end of the nations to which I have driven you. But you I will not make a full end. I will discipline you in just measure, and I will by no means leave you unpunished. So yeah, we see this idea of punishment's coming, but he's not going to completely end you like he is these other nations. I think that's pretty interesting. Anything else to say in that section? For this the earth shall mourn, and the heavens shall be dark. For I have spoken, I will purpose. I have not relented, nor will I turn back. I don't think I have anything to say about that. Nope, I don't. Okay, so wrapping up, last section, verses 29 through 31. At the noise of horseman and archer, every city takes to flight. They enter thickets, they climb among rocks. All the cities are forsaken, and no man dwells in them. And you, O desolate one, what do you mean that you dress in scarlet? That you adorn yourself with ornaments of gold, that you enlarge your eyes with paint? In vain you beautify yourself, your lovers despise you, they seek your life. For I heard a cry as of a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child, the cry of the daughter of Zion, gasping for breath, stretching out her hands. Woe is me, I am fainting before murderers. So, it's such a bummer note to end on. It makes me sad every time. Maybe because I have daughters. Verse 29, at the noise of horseman and archer, every city takes to flight. So, a couple little things happening here. Horseman and archer, this is, referring to, massive weapons of war at the time. These are, the elite fighting units, right? This is your big-time power. So, Judah's hopelessly outmatched here. We then see that every city takes to flight. So earlier God had mentioned, fly to the cities, run away to the cities. Now, I can't remember if that's this verse, this chapter, or the last chapter. I think it's this chapter. And now we see, take flight from the cities, run again. So now you're going to thickets and climbing among rocks. So in these very harsh conditions, all the cities are forsaken and no man dwells in them. Again, this is an exaggeration, I believe. I don't think literally every city was abandoned. But you get the idea here. And you, O desolate one, what do you mean that you dress in scarlet, that you adorn yourself with ornaments of gold, that you enlarge your eyes with paint? So this sort of thing, if I'm not mistaken, is the way that whores would dress at the time. The dressing in scarlet is the key there, I believe. That was kind of your signifier of, you're a professional woman, in a sense. So he's saying that, not only are you beautifying yourself, not only are you're making yourself look good to try to seduce somebody, you're actually trying to whore yourself out to these people that hate you. And that's a really sad picture. That I don't know if the idea is more that they're whoring themselves out in the same way they were before, like worshiping the false gods. They were in love with all that, the cultures of the other nations, or if it's more just talking about, you're hoping you can endear yourself to them and get out of this judgment. Not sure what the idea is there. Something that's kind of fun is that you dress in scarlet, you adorn yourself with ornaments of gold, you enlarge your eyes with paint. So a couple interesting things in that line. You enlarge your eyes with paint. If you look at the KJV, the verse is actually, the word they use to translate enlarge your eyes is actually rent your eyes. That's how they translate it, rent your eyes, because the idea is that, it's like you're tearing your eyes open to make them look bigger, which may have been the typical way of describing putting on makeup. I don't know. It's just the idea of, mascara being like a renting of your eyes is kind of a funny thing, to me anyway. Let's see, what else? Also, so the paint that they would use typically for the eyes back in the time was, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but it's typically stibium, which is a heavy metal, which is toxic. That's kind of what they used for mascara back in the day. So I don't know how well this was known, but I do wonder if that's, not only suggesting, obviously it's bad enough as is, but maybe suggesting sort of a, you're harming yourself in doing this, which of course is apparent by the fact that they're trying to have sex with somebody who's come to kill them. Guess that's pretty clear already, but maybe just an extra layer there. And yeah, let's just finish it up. For I heard a cry as of a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child. So obviously intense pain from labor. And also, it doesn't just talk about labor, but it talks about the first child, which is, I think, often more painful. I know for my wife, the second one came out like that compared to the first one. It was no big deal whatsoever. Not always the case. But not only that, there's also that sense of, like, when you've doing it a second time, you know what you have going into it. Like, you know what to expect. You know there's an end. Whereas the first one, at least the way some people describe it, it's like never-ending, like, when will this be over sort of thing. So, for I heard a cry as a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child, the cry of the daughter of Zion gasping for breath. And this daughter of Zion is Zion is Jerusalem. It's a reference to Jerusalem, and it seems to be talking about daughter of Zion, even though it's a strange way of phrasing it. People say this is talking about like the daughter of God. It's switching to that metaphor. It's like the daughter of God is gasping for breath, stretching out her hands, saying, "Woe is me, I'm fainting before murderers," which is just such a tragic, sad, painful idea as a father to imagine, your child getting to this state, much less having to be the father who makes this, brings the judgment for this state. So, pretty heavy stuff. Jeremiah, isn't it a fun, encouraging book? I'm not feeling very fun and encouraged at the moment. But actually, perhaps that's the point. And actually usually do, but we see this back and forth between Jeremiah and God of expressing their grief over the pain that Judah is about to endure. And I think there's something really worth considering here in that they were actually expressing their grief. I think that's something we struggle with in our country, in our nation, because we're so very prosperous. There's nothing wrong with prosperity, but I think we have become addicted to our own happiness, addicted to our own need to feel good all the time. And I think I'm talking to most of you, but I know for sure I'm talking to me. Just that I think we feel entitled to it, and we don't want to ever feel negative feelings. We never want to go through mourning. Why would we want to mourn? Ugh, it's not fun. But here we see Jeremiah, a man of God, and I would argue God himself, going through a sort of mourning, of being upset, of just having that pain in their chest. My bowels, my anguish, my anguish. They're feeling this, and it feels bad, and they're not afraid to express that anguish. So I think it's important we remember that mourning is an appropriate response to loss. We should feel bad when bad things happen. That's good. And instead we want to dodge bad feelings. I noticed this, I was talking to somebody about this earlier this week, of people tend to want to avoid any idea of death, like they don't want to discuss it. If you talk about the idea that somebody will die one day, like eventually it's going to happen, most people like freak out. Not like hugely, but you can kind of see in their eyes, they're like, why are you talking about this? Stop talking about this. And yeah, I think we kind of want to live in a bit of state of denial on that. We just don't want to deal with it. But I think when you don't deal with those harsh realities, when you don't allow yourself to experience pain, which I'm thinking of a friend right now who I feel, I strongly suspect is really struggling with this, it builds up in other ways. Like you're trying to distract yourself and often turn to sin. You know, maybe some people are trying to avoid those bad feelings and might turn to drugs or pornography, or maybe just acting out on other people, treating them badly in a way to tearing other people down to make yourself feel better about your own condition. And maybe you just turn to things that aren't necessarily bad, but can be a giant distraction, like, you know, TV or social media or what have you. You know, all these patches just kind of to try to avoid the negative feelings. But, you know, Jesus wept, right? He grieved. He felt mourning. And we're commanded to laugh with those that laugh and grieve with those that grieve. Or weep with those that weep, I think is the way the Bible actually says it. But, you know, we're supposed to be having negative feelings sometimes. We're supposed to be experiencing that, of going through that. And that is healthy and good for us. We need to do that. We need to mourn our own sin. We need to mourn the sin of those around us and the destruction we see that brings in their life. And what exactly the balance is there, I don't know. I certainly don't think we should be just down in the mud depressed, but to take the time to feel the negatives that are reflective of reality, that is a good thing. So yeah, we need to feel the loss. We need to allow ourselves to feel the pain in life. Not to necessarily dwell on it unduly, but to feel it and let that work as like a spark of compassion for those in our lives, because there are people in our lives that are grieving and that need comfort. And the more we tend to want to shrug things off, the more we're going to miss those opportunities to see when others are hurting and to help them. So anyway, that's my 5 cents for whatever it's worth. And 43 minutes. I didn't go for 45 minutes if I stop the video right now. Oh my goodness. And I'll probably edit out a few minutes. So my shortest video I'll probably ever make is only like 40 minutes. My shortest long video. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you. Hope it's been interesting. I'm very, 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 very bad at being concise. Anyway, I will catch you guys on the next one. Hopefully next one will not be such a bummer. I don't know why this one, really thinking about this one, it did kind of make me sad, and usually they don't. But again, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we should feel sad sometimes. All right, have a good one. Bye.